Yes.
All right. Welcome to Scaling Value from IIoT, scene number 6. All right, so over the last scenes, we've introduced the concept of what we think is important to scale value from IoT along 3 phases, namely identifying use cases, building solutions and managing derivatives and replications of that, and then how to roll it out in the field, which is probably the most important part of it. And I promised you last time that now we'll talk about how this challenge, the overall challenge, can be addressed. So how do you digitalize your setup? How do you roll out IIoT in your production environment across your plants? And how do you get a digital company? Now let's start with the classical approach, as I call it. So what is the typical approach to this problem today? And how do companies address the challenge of getting digital, installing IIoT as one of the core technologies today? And I would describe it in a very holistic approach and a very generic approach as an analog way of approaching it today. So it's not very digital, it's actually a classical PMO based approach that most customers I've seen are following in some way or the other this approach. Now what is the first step? The first step typically is you set up a PMO. So the C-level comes in and defines digitalization as a very important topic as it is, and installs a dedicated team to drive this digitalization effort. Now this might come into various flavors, but at the end of the day it's dedicated people driving digitalization, and they try to bring together all your experts you have in the company, or also external experts, in order to support this endeavor. Now the next phase, and typically is the use case phase, right? So I call it use case innovation or use case phase. So they come together, they set up a structure, most of the times in PowerPoint or Excel, and then via interviews, via online research, via expert interviews, they try to identify use cases that you can identify, that you can address with IoT and digital solutions to improve your current operations, to improve your current customer services. The next phase then after that typically is, I call it POC, proof of concept. So once you have come up with a list of use cases, then you down select 1 or 2 for a proof of concept, so you technically implement it once in one of your show factories, in one of your core plants. And then the last phase would be the rollout. So you try to replicate this POC in all your sites that have the same use case out of your use case list. Now, when you think that through, so it's a rather people-driven process, PowerPoint-based, meeting-based, maybe a lot more online meetings now after Corona, but at the end of the day, it's a core classical project approach. And we investigated, I would say, 100, 150 projects in detail of this type, and identified actually what are the roadblocks for this. So why is that challenging to implement a real scaling digitalization effort in your company? Now the first and foremost challenge that I see is that I would call another project challenge is the following, that all of your employees and the participants, as it is, the setup is not different from any cost-cutting or improvement project. They just classify this as, okay, it's the next project, all right? It will be over in 3 months, we'll contribute, we'll try to stay alive, and then it's over. It does not give them the impression that this is a digitalization effort which basically changes the way you operate, which digitalization is. And I think this is one of the first challenges. Then the next challenge, I think, is experts are available? Not. I think the key is that you need to involve your experts, people that really understand your production processes, understand your operations, that understand your customers' requirements, if you're a machine builder, for example. And these experts are busy, right? I've never been into a meeting with any manufacturing head or any head of production during which this person did not need to leave the room because something was happening in production. So these experts, of course, they are in chart and they're in your org chart of your project, but actually they are hard to grab on. Now the use case phase, I think there are additional challenges. So the first one is, so there are individual approaches. approaches everywhere, right? So if you bring together your experts from all your plants, I mean, all your plants typically have some sort of digitalization use case repository, but they're hard to compare because they're based on different standards, based on different setups, and that's why you have some individual, also technological approaches sometimes across your different countries or customer base, and it's hard to consolidate them. The next thing is, for the use case phase, it's too much effort. I've seen too many design thinking workshops, brainstorming workshops, all great ideas, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of time effort for these rare experts, and there's not too much concrete output of that, so that you directly can go into action. And this together is a challenge during the use case phase. Now the POC phase is also a challenge in itself, and I think it depends, of course, on how well you structure the project and how well you execute it. But I think one of the biggest challenges is I call it too busy to POC. I mean, a POC at the end of the day sounds to an operator like, okay, it's an investment, so you try something out, it's not really value generating. And these operators in the production lines they run, they are busy producing your product or producing a service. So it's hard to find a POC location, or if you delegate one, then it's hard to get their involvement. Respectively, it's hard to convince these people that there's a real value add already in your POC. It doesn't sound like a proven solution. All right, and then the lags during the rollout. I mean, there are a lot of challenges during the rollout. I mean, we talked a lot about it in the previous scenes, how to replicate a POC in different technological setups that you have. But I think one interesting aspect most of the times come up is the challenge, I call it, oh God, we forgot to involve the operators. And that is for me a challenge where, I call it involvement. That is for me the challenge that you build up something here, a project, rather centrally driven, with experts, internal, external, with some input during the period of time. But nobody really talked to the operators that need to use the solution with their machines, with the production process in their setup in order to generate the value add. And if you find that out during your rollout, then you run a risk that you very soon lose credibility with this type of people, with the operators, and they will just say, okay, well, let's do it and then scrap it and park it somewhere in the corner. And I think these are just a few examples of the challenges you run when you have this PMO-based approach. And now the final statement is, so how do you keep that going once you have set it up? What is your investment required to keep that going? At the end of the day, you need to dedicate people and resources that continuously run this effort, right? Continuously run the workshop, identify use cases, roll them out, install them on site, convince the operators. I mean, this is not a self-sustaining process, it's a people investment process, and that's why it does not scale. And of course, with this type of approaches, you run a risk that you invest a lot and do not get your, first of all, your value output, but especially also not a continuous innovation effort. And that's what we talk about in the next scene, so stay tuned and watch us there. Thank you very much.